Welcome to the first part of the Friendship Bracelets Sailors with Crochet. You're going to want to start with a magic ring, or if you're not comfortable with magic ring, I will go over how to do a chain start as well. I like to wrap it around twice around my fingers because that gives me a really nice tight middle. Once you've done your magic ring, you're going to chain 2. Here is me messing up before going in for my half treble crochet. For Americans, that's a half double crochet, so you'll yarn over before you go into the centre, to yarn over, pull up a loop and yarn over and pull through all 3 of your stitches. So you just want to make sure that you're going through all of those. You're going to do 8 of these stitches. So again, that is yarning over, inserting your hook into the middle, yarning over, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through all 3 stitches. As we're working with cotton, it can sometimes be an issue to catch a little bit of the yarn because the plies like to come apart. So my top tip for you is to just twist the yarn towards you as you do your yarn overs, and that will mean that your fibres remain twisted and don't split quite so much. Once you've done your 8 stitches, you're going to tighten your middle, so whether you've done a magic ring or your chains, you just want to pull tight. So because I've doubled up my magic loop, I'll pull it a little bit first, see which middle bit moves, then pull that one tight and then pull it all nice and tight together. You're then going to join into the top of the first stitch going underneath both of those loops with a slip stitch, so just straight over and pull straight through. Now I'm going to show you how to do it with a chain start because I know the magic ring can be a bit fiddly for some. So you're just going to put a slip knot onto your hook, do a yarn over and do 3 chains, sorry. You're then going to do all of your treble stitches or half treble stitches into that very first chain. You do want to make sure that you've left yourself enough of a tail because you will see that because of the structure of it, it will pull back on that piece of yarn and it will start to come looser. So you want to make sure you're giving yourself plenty of yarn on that yarn tail just so that it doesn't pop out. And then when you're having to pull it, you will have to stitch the middle for a chain start to make sure that the middle doesn't come loose. Whereas with the magic ring, especially the double magic ring, it will stay tight. Whereas the chain start here, it just doesn't stay quite as tight. So if you give yourself enough of a yarn tail there, you'll be able to use it to easily stitch together just to hold it in place. And again, join with your slip stitch into the top of that stitch and then just pull it nice and tight. So now moving on to round 2. This is where things can get a little bit confusing for people. So you're going to chain 2 to get the height of your stitch, and you're not going to go into the stitch that you've done your slip stitch into at any point again. What you're going to do is 2 half trebles, that's 2 half doubles for the US, into each stitch as you go around. So that's effectively doing an increased stitch using half trebles into each stitch. An increased stitch being 2 stitches in this instance. So you want to make sure that you're doing 2 into every single stitch in the previous round. You're working underneath the top parts of your stitch, both parts of it. You're working underneath the front loop and the back loop to make it nice and secure, and you're doing 2 into each one. It's just going to keep working your way around, doing 2 half trebles. For the US, that's half doubles, all the way around. If you would like to see the written version of this video, you will be able to find that on my blog, which will be linked in the description of this video if you're not already watching this on my blog. And hello to you if you are. So you're going to continue working 2 half trebles, that's half doubles to the US, into each stitch. Now when you reach the end where you did your slip stitch from the previous round, you're actually going to use that as the final stitch. So rather than working into where you did the slip stitch into and the 2 chains came out of, you're going to work around the slip stitch. This means that you create more of a seamless look on the front of the piece. You won't see the slip stitch working across, whereas if you didn't go over the slip stitch, you would see a bar where you had joined your piece together. And it's just not quite as neat as having it done in this way. So by doing the slip stitch into the top of that stitch rather than into the chain, you effectively get rid of that stitch, and it means that you work around the slip stitch at the beginning to gain that stitch in the back. For round 3, as with all amigurumi circle geometry law, you are going to do 1 half treble, half double, and then 2. So you'll go 1 stitch and then increase all the way around. So previously you were working, so your first round you have a set of 1 stitch times 8. Now you're going to have a set of, then you have a set of 2 stitches, in round 2 times by 8, so you had 16 stitches. Now in round 3 we're having a set of 3 stitches, so it's 1 stitch in the first stitch and then 2 stitches and increase into the second stitch, counting as 3 stitches within that section 8 times around. And again, you aren't going to go into the stitch where you did your slip stitch, you'll chain 2 out of there and then ignore it for the rest of the round. And you'll work around your slip stitch at the end just to cover over that, like, the way that the bar goes across. I should have done a part in here where I showed you the difference, but just trust me, trust the process, it really does work well. So yes, on this you will be doing 1 stitch in, so 1 half treble, half double, and then 2 into the next one. So in sometimes going 1 2 1 2 1 2, you'll end up with 24 stitches at the end of the round. And it's just following the basic geometry rules of working in crochet circles. If we were working in continuous circles, I would say to offset your increases, but because we are skipping across where we're going into the top of that first stitch and we're not working that first stitch, we actually end up offsetting the increases anyway. So now for round 4, we're going to do the same thing. So we've just joined with our slip stitch, and you're going to work 2 chains, and then you're going to work this time 1 half treble, half double, 2 stitches in a row. So you do 1 1 and then do your increase, and that increase is going to be sitting on top of the singular stitch from the previous round rather than as part of the increase from that round, which will mean that rather than creating a bit more of an octagon shape, you will continue to keep that perfect circle. Whereas if you didn't, like, if you weren't staggering them because of how we're working the joined rounds, you would end up with like slight corners starting to form and it just wouldn't be quite as neat. But because of how we're working it, we don't need to worry about that because it is naturally staggering for us. So again, you're going to be working 1 1 2, half treble, 2 half trebles. Another way that people will write this is to say half treble in the next 2 stitches. Some people will say 2 half trebles and then 2 half trebles in the next stitch. Which is a bit confusing to me. So you want to go 1 1 2, so half treble, 2 half trebles, and you're going to work that section of 4 stitches around the entire circle to the end. And again, that last increase you're going to do around the slip stitch at the end of the round. So continue working your half trebles. So that's 1 1 2, half treble, 2 half trebles, a half treble increase as you were. There's so many ways to write and communicate crochet patterns, and everybody likes them separately, so it's always a bit maddening. But I think hopefully we've described enough here on how to do that for you. And as I say, if you'd like the full pattern, you can find it over on my blog if you're not already on that page. So you're going to continue to work. This is me doing a little bit of counting there. But you're going to continue to work 1 1 2 the entirety of the way around. This time you want to be adding in, you'll be adding in 8 stitches every single round as an increase as part of the half treble, half double geometry. So this round you'll end up with 32 stitches. You could of course continue on after this round if you wanted to make an even bigger friendship bracelet. But just continue to follow doing 8 increases every single round. So where we're going 1 1 2, you would go 1 1 1 2, and so on and so forth. So you just keep adding them in as you go. But I think this makes like a really nice size to play with, and it means that the lettering is a nice thickness as well. So you're going to finish up this one by going through the back loop of the top and the back loop on the back of the half treble crochet. It's a bit difficult to see. But when you're pushing it through the back loop, it will kind of take you quite naturally through the back loop on this stitch as well. So it's the back loop on the top of the stitch and the back loop of the half treble as well. So now this is going to help us turn the corner of the edge of the bead. So you're now going to continue to work into each stitch. So going underneath both of those back loops, so the back loop on the top and the back loop on the back. It is much simpler than it sounds. It's just quite fiddly to show with the white, which is slightly annoying. I try and keep these nice and relatable for you, hopefully helpful enough as well. So continue to work through. So it's the back loop on the top. So where you would normally go through the front loop and the back loop, you're going to go through the back loop on the top and the back loop on the back of the stitch. When you do your half trebles, you will quite naturally see where this other loop is. So when you flip it over, you'll see where they are. And just the top of the stitch ends up kind of creating this almost box braid type look to it. And you'll just be able to see quite easily where it is, and it can honestly sometimes be a bit easier. So you're going to continue to work one half treble, half double into each stitch as you go around, and you just want to make sure that you're not doubling up on any, because you want this to be nice and even. And it's by going into the back loops, by going into both back loops, you are making sure that actually that join's quite secure. You could just go into the back loop on the top, so where you do back loop or front loop only, you could just go into the back loop there, but it's just not quite as secure as going through both, because it's only got one strand of yarn to hold it there, and it just pulls on it a bit. It can work just fine, but I think because we're doing the half treble, half double, it just worked quite nicely to be able to do that. It gives you a more secure purchase on that corner, makes it more secure when you're stuffing your piece as well, and it just keeps that shape that little bit nicer, rather than the singular loop will stretch just that little bit too much for my liking. But if you're only happy going through the back loop on the top, that is absolutely fine. Don't worry too much about it. It isn't going to necessarily change the structure of the piece. It just won't be quite as secure on that corner. But if you're working with a more solid stuffing like you see that I will, it shouldn't be too much of a problem for you anyway. So on this last one, it can get a little bit confusing because you've got the slip stitch. You kind of have to just guide it through a little bit. If you do end up just going through the back loop on the top on that last bit, I wouldn't worry too much about it. The one stitch isn't going to harm. So you can just see where, because we've gone into the back loops, it started to create that squared off side, and you'll get all the front loops kind of nicely forming this front on the corner as well. So you're going to join with a slip stitch into the top of that first half treble, half double, and then continue to do 2 chains and work 1 half treble into each stitch as you go around. So this is probably the most simple round of the entire thing. You're just going to work 32 half trebles, so that's 1 in each stitch all the way around. I'm not sure if you could tell there, but I just had to pause because I was about to yawn. It's actually 5 to 11 at night here in the UK currently. But I am absolutely determined to get all of these videos and everything done this weekend so I can share this with everybody, and hopefully you'll have some time to make, if you want to do a Christmas themed garland before Christmas. But that's the great thing about this project, is that because you have the 2 sides to it, I've created a Merry Christmas on one side and I've planned it to be a Fuck the Patriarchy on the other side, which was where the whole idea started in the first place. I just really wanted to be able to have it on my wall in a really casual way. But then I thought, how else can I make this work nicely? And people always tell me off because I'm not very Christmassy, so I was like, how can I make myself as Christmassy as possible? And the answer to that question was to make it Taylor Swift themed Christmas. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I've enjoyed making it. It does take a little bit of time. I'm not very good at making the same thing twice either, so making however many beads this was nearly drove me slightly crazy. You can tell that this round's quite boring, but I just want to show the entire process at 100% speed so that you're able to follow it nicely. I know I still crochet relatively quickly, but because it is just the 1 stitches, hopefully it's not too fast. And of course you can always just slow it down on YouTube anyway, and the full written pattern for reference is on the blog. I'll pop the link in the I was going to say the show notes. I spent too much time listening to podcasts. The link will be in the notes for the video, as I say, if you're not already on the page. So once you get to the end there, you want to leave yourself with about a 30 centimetre length to stitch it together at the end. I didn't give myself enough on this one, so you'll see what you will do in the instance of if this thread isn't long enough. So all I'm doing here is just pulling that thread through the back loops just to secure off that end there. But I'm not going to worry too much more about it. So you can see the width here of the side of our bead. To do the back side, you will just do the first 4 rounds. It's exactly the same. So you'll just do the first 4 rounds, and then you'll have the flat version, and then eventually we will stitch this version onto the back of the other one. but I'm now going to show you a rough way on how you can crochet the surface crochet of the letters. So you can see where the stitches have formed that you do end up with some instances where you should be able to, for instance, if you're doing an eye, surface crochet straight up the middle. Because of where the increases fall, there should be certain points where if you angle it correctly, you'll be able to go straight up. There are other points where, you know, you will have to kind of force it through a little bit, but because of the half treble, half double structure, you can actually go through the middle of those stitches and it will sit there quite securely. I worked most of mine around the concept of starting from this outside point, and then if I was doing a straight line up for like a P or an R, I would try and keep that to be like 1.5 from the middle, 1.5 rounds from the middle, and then like 2.5 rounds roughly from the edge, and then that allowed me actually a fairly decent path upwards. This is me putting it on as a slip knot on my hook, which I didn't want to do. So you want to find your hole that's going to give you that path. I will try and include these paths in a PDF for you. Again, that will be on my blog. So you just want to try and find the right point to start these letters, and there will be rows of dots and like middles of the stitches that will give you a really nice way to do it. So for the P, I go up the side, come back around in through that middle part, and then secure it off. So we do create the little P shape, and obviously from there you'll be able to make your R shapes as well. Following the curve sometimes on things like S's and C's is really useful, G's, all the kind of nice curvy letters. The tops of the P's and R's, B's, whatever, they all follow that like quite a nice line. So you just want to take it through. So you'll insert your hook and pull back through, and then just try and follow the dots that you've kind of envisaged in your brain up the side of this. So try really hard, like I very nearly pulled both parts of it through. So just make sure you're pulling through one part of it there. You also do want to be making sure that you're giving yourself enough leeway with these stitches so it's not too tight. So generally just think about how big your typical chain would be, and those are the sorts of spacings that you can deal with. So I've just gone through a middle of a bit of a stitch there, and I'm just going to follow it up. So I didn't want to get too close to the middle here. I wanted to be in that half the stitch, so this is me just trying to locate that right location, because I don't want to go into what is the top of the first round. I want to go in between the first round and the second round, and I'm literally just looking at it and thinking about where does that line go, where are the holes, and like if you do have to skip a bit more and they get a bit bigger, like that's the beauty of it. You can just tailor it based on, you know, how your crochet is working out. Like have you had the circle around the right way as you've started doing it? So you just want to, you know, give yourself some grace, have a little bit of an experiment. To say I will try and include a sort of rough guide on where you can do these placements, with like a little diagram of a circle and where they'll go. So it will only work if you've done like a full size one. But you can see that just by following a kind of rough guesstimation, I've ended up with quite a straight line. So you just then want to be turning it. So you just keep your hook in there, turn your work, and then that will turn your stitches. You can fasten it off there if you want and start again, but there's no real need to. So for the top of the P's and the R's, I do just do a couple of stitches round, and then I want to start to taper it as the curve of the letter starts to kick in a bit more. So following the curve of the circle, as it does give a slight curve, but we want to kind of start bringing it round to come into the middle of the letter. So just keep going round basically, finding those middle parts. So this I'm just showing you here what will happen if you pull too tightly. Those fronts of your stitches will just, they'll pull so much that you'll see where it's going through the material. So you want to just give yourself enough of a looser tension on them that it sits flat and it's not all pulling and buckling and all that jazz. You want to give yourself, you know, the proper tension. So I'm just working around now, pulling that through. In fact, you can see that I've done it a little bit too tight on it there, having just redone it. And then just working around and finishing off the P there. So the easiest way to then finish it, I would finish it here even for an R as well. I would do the P and then do the other leg of the R. So just pull it out through so that the end pops through the front. Now what you're going to do is insert your hook through the hole that you have just crocheted through and pull that end back through to the back, and then you can just tie it off and it will be nice and secure. When you are tying any knots on the back, do make sure not to pull too tightly because you will pull on the front of the stitches as well, so just be, be mindful of the fact that that is going to be there for you. So again, like if you were then doing an eye, you would connect it on to like where the curve is and end up coming down. So it's a really nice simple way to do it. If you do want to just stitch on, you can. That's absolutely fine. Just get your needle and thread and stitch it instead. It's going to be a little bit easier to get those placements more correct. So you can just see here where I've got like that kind of 2.5-ish rows either side that I'm working within like a kind of 3-row radius in that middle section to try and keep it nice and central, keep the lettering nice and consistent. So in order to stuff my letter beads, what I've done is got this kind of thin, foamy, it's very strange. I think it's packing stuff my mum gave me that I've had for ages, and I was like, this is actually, because I didn't want to use brown cardboard because I didn't want that to show through the white. You could use some cardboard and then have a sheet of paper because it's unlikely to need to be washed at any point. So you could just use that. This stuff should be relatively useful. It's like, it's not too solid, it's a little bit squidgy, but it still gives you enough of that like structural. Obviously it's square, so all I've done is just kind of trim these corners off a little bit. I'm not trying to make it circular, it's honestly almost like an octagon instead, but just trimming those corners off so I can then nestle it into the bead, like the first part of the bead that we made. This is me just cleaning up. This is proper real-time situation, guys. The only bits I cut out of this are where I've like, even a rolling bead, we're going to keep this in, why not, let's keep it real. You can't even see the bead in the YouTube version of this video. You can see the kind of blurry version on the side. Anyway, so you just take your little discs that you've created, whether that be in cardboard, you could use fibre fill, but the thing with the fibre fill is that you're not necessarily going to keep that straight front. So I would recommend putting a piece of relatively solid card on either side, just so that you can get that shape to stay. This is me trapping some of the thread in the back. It's all going really well up until this point. Stitching it on always goes swimmingly. So I just tuck the ends in because if you have seen anything I've ever done before, you will know I'm vehemently allergic to, well, everything in life, but mostly sewing in ends. It just, the idea of it brings me up in hives. So I did have to do a little bit of a cut there because I couldn't find my needle. So I spent about a minute wandering around looking for my needle, which was just under a piece of paper on the table. So all you want to do is make sure you've kind of sewn the end in the same way that you did the first ones, just going through those back loops, and that will make that little end a bit more secure, and then you can just tuck that in. I don't really worry too much about like tying off many of the ends in this project because they will sandwich in, and because I'm using the kind of slightly staticky middle part, they do then tend to stick quite nicely. So what you want to try and make sure with this part of it is that you're lining your letters up. So you need to be able to flip it over. If you just like, if it was on, imagine it being on the piece of string and it's rotating around, the letters, if you're doing the same letter on both sides, you want the P to be upside down on one side and the opposite to each other. So when you're flipping it, it always looks like it's the right way up. So I've put my needle in there so you can just see with the star, I wanted the point at the top, so I would put the bottom where the 2 prongs, where the top of the P is. So then you're just going to take your length of yarn, and you're going to go into the back loops on the second piece that you made, so just the flat piece. You'll go into the 2 back loops, so again through the back loop on the top and through the back loop of the half treble, and we're just trying to mimic a little bit the stitches that you did to create that first corner. So by leaving that front loop, we are going to then create that like front loop ridge again. It doesn't look quite the same because obviously you do have the stitches in there, but it just looks a little bit nicer, a little bit more the same. I'm starting to lose words at this point, guys. It is 11:10 now. So more consistent, that's the word I wanted. So you'll go through the back loops on that and then the main loops, both of the top loops, on the main part of the bead that you're connecting it to. And you just want to make sure you're giving it a nice tight tug every now and again, because that will mean that it does blend in that little bit more. As I said earlier, I did end up not having quite a long enough piece of thread that I had left at the end, so you do want to make sure that you've left yourself a really nice long bit, because otherwise you'll be like me and need to connect a new bit in partway through. And while it's not the end of the world, I will show you what I do. It's a relatively easy fix. It's just slightly annoying. So yeah, you just want to go around going through those back loops only, and making sure then that you're going through both of the top loops on the bottom one, because this is going to match in the corner that you have on the other side as well. So you end up with that kind of front loop bit on that edge, and it just creates that nice cute corner, and makes it nice and neat. So you can start to see I'm starting to struggle with the length of my thread at this point. So there'll be a moment in a sec where I will cut again, because I had to locate the white yarn which had fallen underneath the table, and I managed to bring out the grey yarn several times before I managed to find the white yarn. So yeah, again, you are just going to be going through the back loops on that stitch, and that should help you then create that really nice consistent look. It'll be a bit more secure than just going through the back loop on the top of the bead again. So yeah, it just gives you that really nice bit of purchase to come to. So I'm going to cut now, because I know that I'm about to run out of yarn and struggle to find the ball of yarn for quite some time. You can tell that I'm starting to get to the point where I need to go to bed, because the awkward laughter is coming out and it sounds ridiculous. So anyway, here I have now found the right yarn. I'm going to essentially just go through a few stitches before, and it will be sandwiching between a couple of those layers of stuffing and pulling it through. You want to make sure that you're not pulling too hard when you do this first stitch, so that you don't pull it through itself. So you're just going to continue. So I've just left the thread and I've gone through the same point that I had just stitched, and then just continuing around. But on that first one I've not pulled it too tightly, and then just a couple of stitches as you go in you can start to pull it a little bit tighter, and then just continue on your way. It's really annoyingly minimal amount of stitches. There's probably only about, I don't know, 8 stitches left or something, so you know, very, very little amount of stitches left to go, and managed to run out of yarn because I didn't really think it through when I was cutting my ends off. Sometimes if I will leave myself a bit of a tail on the other side, so when I do the second half of the bead I'll leave myself a tail there too, because then it means that I can just use that if all else fails. So I literally am so allergic to sewing in ends and tying things off and everything else, that all I did here was just pass my needle through the middle, pull it through and then cut it off, and then I do the same thing with the other end from previously. Just because that friction that's caused by the stuffing that I'm using, it just holds it in place anyway. It's not anything special or anything like that, but it just means that like these ends are quite easy to deal with. Because this end is quite short, I will insert my needle first and then thread my needle once it's in, because then it makes it that little bit easier. In fact, I just tried to pass the whole needle through without putting the thread in there. So yeah, you just want to make sure that you actually put your yarn through the hole and then pull it through. So because of it pulls a bit when it obviously flicks off the needle, I just use the needle to pull it back slightly so you don't get any sort of like inward puckering for it. And then you can just trim it off, and there you go. That is your letter bead done and dusted the right way up, and it spins around nicely.